Before I start this evening, who of you had a good afternoon? Wasn't the sunshine absolutely beautiful? In the morning it was very cold, got dressed up all warm, kitted out, and then was able to enjoy a beautiful afternoon with the family and the in-laws having a good bride with one another. Who of you, another question, enjoyed doing mondelings or orals at school? I was definitely not one of those. I think one of the biggest fears is public speaking for many. I often would rather take a note than actually go through with my mondelings. I think that often exploded my marks, not that I was ever a genius or got anything above 70, but that was one of the reasons why my languages were so low, because I tried to steer clear of public speaking as much as I could. But as life goes on, we are sometimes forced in a direction that we wouldn't always want to be in. But God knows what's best for all of us. Yeah. This evening, it's going to be the first time that I'm preaching here at Bellville. I've been fortunate enough to preach once or twice at Kraaifontein Church and one or two other churches, but never here at home. So it's a great honor and also a learning experience, because there's a lot more people that know me and might have a lot more expectations than people that I don't know. Tonight's lesson that I've entitled is to make a difference by being different. In life, we go through stages and phases, whether it be physically, spiritually, or in our careers. These changes will come along in some form or another. Physically, we are born, we are babies, then we mature on to being toddlers, then we end up going to primary school, high school, university. Then we go on to being a young adult, eventually an adult, and then we cross over to the category of being elderly. Spiritually, we are originally introduced to the Word. We are taught, we start reading and learning, then we obey. We start introducing others and teaching, and the more we learn, the more we are challenged. Our careers, when we start, we have no experience, no responsibilities or accountability. Then we start getting more experience, more accountability, and this just generally increases the more we are challenged, and as life goes on. If I look at my own life, I started my career originally at Cape Arts and Crafts. It was my first job that I received as an assistant in the shop, just helping out wherever I could. I had no experience in retail. It was very short-lived. I think it was a total of 2 months, but it was a very interesting and a good learning curve. However, when I started my career at Indawu, which is where I am today, it's a family business, I also had no experience. I had no clue on what the building industry was about. But I was blessed to start on site as a labourer. I absolutely loved it. It was physically tough. At those times I had spare time to go to gym, so my body was very important to me. And instead of going to gym, I could work on site, and I was able to benefit in both ways, both physically and be able to earn some sort of an income. But the nice part about being the labourer or the man on site was when you went to work, you did your work, and when you left work, that's when work stopped. You could enjoy your life and your weekend respectively. Once I gained more experience in this, I became a foreman and then managed the site and had responsibilities of taking timesheets, ordering materials, and being responsible for others and the work that they executed. Then from there, went on to being a contracts manager that had to oversee 2 or 3 sites and checking 2 or 3 foremen. So as things progressed, more and more responsibility came on you. It was no longer just you going to site, doing what you needed to do. You had to now ensure that people had the right materials, that they got it to site on time, and you also had to make sure that others were doing what they were supposed to. Eventually, to where I am today, being accountable and responsible for the company and all the staff that it employs. So now, before you get to work, you're working, and after you leave work, you're still working. With the changes of moving up comes the changes of responsibility and accountability. And we need to choose how we react and how we use it. If you look at any manager, leader, governor, president, or king, although they are in charge, they have the power to effect change, but they also have to make choices and are tempted in various ways. And because of the extra pressure, stress, constant expectation, there are times of vulnerability, weakness, where they can start making incorrect choices, such as they don't need anyone but themselves. They've got the power, they're in charge, everybody else gets excluded or excluded. Sometimes using their position to gain personally, bribes, corruption, not giving others opportunities. I'm the main man, I don't want anybody else given a chance. Showing favoritism, etc. But if you would please turn with me to Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to be reading the entire chapter and see how we can use this as an example of what happens in our everyday lives and how Daniel, by choosing to be different, made a difference. Daniel chapter 6 from verses 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with these 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. This position that was made available, which would be second to the king, but number 1 in terms of accountability and responsibility. The king still had the power, still had the riches, the castle, most probably all the benefits of being the ruler, but he wanted to put one individual, in this case originally the 120 satraps, to govern. It was then shortlisted to 3 to oversee all the responsibilities so that the kingdom would not suffer loss. Due to Daniel excelling in his duties and leading by example, the king recognized him and wanted to promote. This is similar in today's terms. If you are doing well, you're leading by example, you're taking ownership of what needs to be done, you are generally given an opportunity to take on more responsibilities. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of the government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Verse 5. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it is something to do with the law of God." When people are given opportunities or promotions, often other people that were in line for the same thing get envious, and they go out of their way to undermine the person that was given the opportunity. In Daniel's case, they went out of their way to find fault, but after looking, they could find nothing, only that he obeyed his God. What would people find if they had to look into our lives? And their main purpose was to expose our faults and our wrongs. Would it not be a wonderful accomplishment or honor to be in Daniel's shoes, that after being investigated and audited, the only fault of yours is that you obey God? Verses 6. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now your majesty, issue a decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. After finding no fault, they had to go out of their way to make Daniel stumble. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then his men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Even though Daniel knew that there was a new law that was passed, he made a choice to continue to obey God and worship his God, knowing the consequences. Often in life, we often blame and create excuses of things that have happened or changed outside of our control. But we still have the choice as to how we react to the things that are outside our control. Daniel was not swayed by outside factors, and he stayed true to his beliefs. Verses 12. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not establish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Notice how they first get to the king. Notice how they first get the king to reconfirm his decision that he made, so that he would not be able to change his mind, as they knew that Daniel found favor in the king's eyes. So they were very tactful. They knew that if the king maybe knew that this was going to go against Daniel, he might have tried to find a way. But before, they just reaffirmed, didn't you set a new decree? It can't be altered. Just reassuring, re-signing that contract that it can't be cut or broken. This also happens where we can be tricked into doing things without knowing the full consequences until it's too late. Today, I'm just going to use a simple example. There are more serious offences. Sometimes insurances, provident funds, often people promising you the world, just sign, yeah, it's nothing major, it's 200 Rand. Before you know it, it's a binding contract, you can't get out of it. Only once you know that it's not worth anything, you're already tied into it. Verse 13. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put into writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and make every effort until sundown to save him. The men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes, the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. Once again, reaffirming. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. At this stage, the king knew it was outside of his control, and he could no longer effect any change. But look at how he chooses to react. He made a decision to want to believe in Daniel's God, as he knew if Daniel is to be saved, it had to be a power more great than himself, because his hands were tied. Although being the most powerful person in that kingdom, he had set a decree that he could not revert after reaffirming it 3-4 times. So he had no other choice. This was out of dire circumstance, that he had no other reason, or out of desperation, to put his faith in Daniel's God to save him. Verse 17. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation may not be changed. 18. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lion's den?" King Darius had enough faith and hope that the God Daniel served would have been able to save him, that he ran out and called to Daniel. He saw Daniel being put in the lion's den. He saw the stone that was placed on top, and he had to seal it. So he knew that Daniel was in that lion's den, and there were lions in the... There was no trickery, nothing else. But yet he still ran up when he woke up and shouted out to him, "Daniel, Daniel, has your God saved you?" He also acknowledges that Daniel served a living God. Verse 21, Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." God delivered him from the lion's den because Daniel was found innocent in the sight of God. Being found innocent in the sight of God, again, what an honor that would be. How many of us would be able to have passed that test? Not only that, but he had never done wrong to his earthly leader either. So firstly, he passed the test of being submissive and obedient to God. Secondly, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. So he served his earthly master to the best of his ability. Then the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in God. Daniel trusted God. 24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and their children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Due to the actions taken from the men who set up Daniel, they faced earthly consequences for doing wrong. Not only that, their wives and their children, who might not have known anything about what they were setting up or trying to achieve, but their wives and their children also suffered these consequences. Like also in life, sometimes I'm just going to take a sin of drinking and driving. That person might be sinning, but because of his actions, others might be hurt. Other people's lives might be lost due to his actions, and there are other consequences that might have been faced. Verse 25, Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and the people of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Due to Daniel's obedience, love, and consistency, he was able, by his action, to impact his immediate environment and eventually the entire kingdom. By Daniel being different, he was able to make a difference. God will be able to use us for his glory but we will at times be faced with making a choice to go with the flow or to be different as God wants and calls us to be different in order for us to make a difference. In conclusion, how can we be different in order to make a difference? We need to put God first and obey Him no matter what comes our way. When changes happen in our life, we still need to choose God and what is right, even if it has earthly consequences. Daniel was prepared to be fed to the lions. If we also use Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from Daniel 3, verses 15. Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we were thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Verse 18, very key. But even if He does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had faith. They trusted in their God. The consequences of not following the King Nebuchadnezzar's instruction was also to face death, to be thrown into a furnace. But they had enough faith in our God to continue to obey His command, irrespective of the earthly consequences. Not only that, they also acknowledged that even if it wasn't God's will to save them, and they would have died, they were still prepared to be obedient and follow through on serving God, even if it resulted in their death. We need to trust and have faith in God and set an example to others. Daniel prayed 3 times a day. They could find no fault. God could find no fault. And Daniel trusted God. When changes or challenges come our way, remember we still have a choice as to how to react. Let's react in the way God wants us to react. I would like to challenge all of us here tonight to go out into the world and make a difference by being different for God.